What are some expectations and procedures when students are working together on a lab? What about lab safety procedures? That's what we are talking about today. Aloha, my teacher friends. If we haven't met yet, I am Fleur, the face of Aloha Monday Teaching, where I help middle school science teachers be intentional, prepared, and refreshed for Monday and any day. I give strategies, resources, and things like that. All right, so don't forget to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. That way you don't miss anything. I share lots of strategies here. And you can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Aloha Monday Teaching. And go to fleurstrongoli.com/daily where you can get your free guide, 5 daily must-do routines to run your science classroom like a pro. So we're talking about expectations. So this would be a great thing to download today if you haven't yet. And this is for any teacher, new teacher, veteran teacher. And that way you can have some good strategies to do every day, no matter what you are teaching. All right. So welcome to part 2 of our 2-part series, Setting Classroom Expectations for Middle School. So if you didn't watch the first video, it was all about setting your classroom expectations, your general routines. We walked through the beginning, middle, and end of your day and brainstormed a bunch of different routines that need to be taught. So if you haven't, the link is in the description. You can watch or you can read the blog post, up to you. So today we're talking about cooperative learning, lab safety, and lab procedures and setting those classroom expectations. Remember, when you are setting your science classroom expectations, that you need to teach them, practice, and reinforce those expectations. This is something that you would do at the beginning of the school year, but you also want to review it throughout the school year. You want to correct it when students aren't doing it the way that they should be doing. You want to teach it again when you have a new student come in, or if you need to change it, it's okay to make adjustments. Just make sure you teach them how you want them to do it. All right, well, let's get started. So if you watched the video or read the blog post about setting up your science classroom, you might remember this seating arrangement. So I showed this picture, and there's numbers at each. These are the desks in rows, and this is how my classroom is set up. I actually have 4 more desks. I have 36 desks, but this is for 32 in this picture, and they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. So you'll see a 1, 2, 3, 4 at every single group. I like to assign those seat numbers so that they know what to do if I call on that number. But students do need to be taught your expectations of working together, how to discuss, how to listen to each other, how to participate, and how to share the responsibility of the group's job. So what I do with this seating arrangement is, so like I said, each seat is numbered 1 through 4. I like to make sure they're all in the same spots too. If you notice, the 1s are all on the bottom left of the group, and then it just rotates. So I could call on all the 1s to go get papers, 2s, go get the lab materials, and so on. Another tip really quick that I didn't mention in the setting up your classroom video, when you actually seat students in these seats, something else I like to do is make sure I put students with different, like let's say my resource students, I might put them all at seat number 2. And that way I know when I call on my 2s, I need to make sure I give them more time to prepare their response or something like that. So that's another strategy you can do when it comes to actually putting your kids in seats. All right, back on track. So this is how I manage my labs. I might have student 1, they're going to get the materials. Student 2 starts and sets up the lab. And then in order, they take turns, student 3, student 4, and then back to 1. That way, everybody gets to participate. Everyone has some kind of job. And at the end, everybody has to clean up. So, and then what I would do is for the next lab, I would change it. So now student 2 gets the materials, student 3 starts the lab, student 4 is next, and so on. So that way each student has a different job when the labs change. But if I don't use where they're seated, if I don't use those groups, then I'll list their groups on the screen and then I'll have their jobs for them. And it's the same idea. This is how I do it. So one more part about cooperative learning is working with a partner. So this was the group work part. So sometimes they want to just work with another person, or I have them work on a partner project. I might have them work with the person they're sitting next to, or they can choose. And some students like to stand, which I don't mind. Others like to sit, which is fine, as long as they're working. So when they're working with partners, each student must contribute to it, not one person doing all the work. Otherwise, if they start goofing off and one person's just doing all the work, then they lose that privilege of working with a partner. So that's just a procedure that you want to make sure you also teach. So write down some ideas of what it looks like in your classroom, and like when they're working together in groups or with partners. Okay, lab safety. I could make a whole video on just lab safety, but let's just focus on the setting expectations part of science lab safety in our science classes. So as science teachers, we usually teach lab safety at the beginning of the school year, and then we remind and we reteach all year long. So this is a very, very, very important part of running your science classroom. So I like to use, what you see here is a lab safety product I have in my Teachers Pay Teachers store. So I have a link below. But what I like to use just 10 safety rules, because there's a lot out there. Unless if your school provides it, there's so many rules and so many variations of them. So in here, I've narrowed it down to 10 that covers everything. And that way it's simple for our middle school students to follow. And I also show them the rules and the safety symbols and things like that in our textbooks, because that's a good resource to also use. And we have students sign a safety contract, and that in order to participate in labs, they have to pass a lab safety test. And if they don't follow the rules, they'll have to sit out, and they fill out a reflection form, which I have that in here too. So when I teach the lab safety rules, because remember, we're talking about setting those expectations, I review PowerPoints with them. We practice the rules. I reinforce them. I correct them when they're not doing it properly. And I have them make a project to demonstrate what they understand about the safety rules. They take that test. And that's just what I do at the beginning of the school year. That's just like the first week or so. For the remainder of the school year, specifically on lab days, sometimes on project days too, I'll review safety rules. But on lab days, I remind them of the safety rules. So in my PowerPoint, when it comes to the lab, I put the rules, I list them. So I review it with them, and they know that if they don't follow a rule, they might have to sit out. They would have to reflect. They might lose the privilege of completing the entire lab. And it's just really important to be consistent with this piece. I also, when they're working on the lab, I like to keep track of who's following the safety rules. I have my clipboard, and who's not. I usually just tally, but then when it comes to grading their lab sheet or lab report, I deduct points for not following lab safety rules. So that's another thing you can do. All right, and finally, let's talk about lab procedures. So we need to teach the students how to work in the lab. And this is where you're thinking of your safety rules and how you would, like, what they need to follow and how it looks when they're conducting a lab. So let's look at some of the procedures that we need to teach them. Here's some routines of what I have in place in my classroom, and some examples of what it actually looks like. So working in the lab area, I assign the groups to lab stations. So this group might go to lab station 1, and they have to stay at their lab station. They can't go travel around and talk to other groups, because that to me is called horseplay. That's where I put that into the horseplay category, or they're not following directions. They're breaking safety rules. And they must also keep their lab area clean while they are working. Gathering materials. So like I mentioned earlier, I assign a student to grab all the materials. Usually, well, the way that I do this in my classroom is my very first class of the day. Like I have all my materials out on a lab table and like my lab table. My first class of the day, they're going to set up the lab for the rest of the day. So they're gathering the materials. When the next class comes in, those materials are already at the lab stations, but they might have to come and replenish certain things. So that's when that student comes and gets materials. So there's still materials to get, but they don't necessarily have to set up the entire lab, just that first class. um, so the way that I do this, when they're first setting it up, when they're getting the materials, I have a stack of trays. I think of it like going through a cafeteria line. You have your trays and you have each material. So you're just walking through. It's like a production line. So you get your tray, you get this material, then you get this one, and that way they have everything that they need. Beginning the lab. So this is where I mentioned that the next student actually gets to start the lab. And then they take turns doing each part. They'll need to collect data as they're working. So I give them a lab sheet and they write down their data and their observations. Cleaning up. Before we even start, I go through the cleanup directions because I want them to know what to expect and what to do when they are done. And so as they're collecting data and going through that part of the lab, they have how to do it on their sheet. So I will post the cleaning up slide. I'll post that on my screen. And that way they know. So every student's expected to help clean up. Now, when we get to the last class of the day, their directions usually change because my other classes will clean up and leave materials at the lab stations. My very last class of the day brings all those materials back to me. So that way my procedure is to put them away, put them back where I got them from. So that is the cleaning up. So what other lab procedures do you have in place? So just think of your safety rules and make a procedure out of it. You could teach them what to do if something breaks, what to do if the lab isn't working out the way that it should. That means they messed up something or it's just not working, because that happens too. And that's part of science, and you kind of teach that routine. What should they do if one of their group members is not following directions? So those are just a few ideas. All right, so remember that classroom expectations for middle school need to be set, and procedures and routines must be taught, practiced and reinforced, and then reviewed for success. And remember, if you need to make adjustments, that's totally fine. Just make sure you teach those changes and reinforce them. So you can and you should teach and review procedures all year long. So these science classroom procedures we talked about today are pretty specific to labs, and working together is essential in a science classroom. So some of these cooperative learning strategies are just helpful anytime, even on non-lab days. All right, so now it's your turn. Make a list of the science procedures you currently teach and any others that you should be teaching. And then write out what it should look like in your classroom. Like, what are students doing? And then teach it, practice it, and reinforce it. All right, so before you go, be sure you've already liked and subscribed so you don't miss out on anything. And then don't forget to grab that guide, your free guide, 5 Daily Must-Do Routines to Run Your Science Classroom Like a Pro. The link is below, but it's floorstrongoli.com/daily. Well, thank you for joining me as we talked about setting classroom expectations in part 2, when we talked about all about lab procedures and lab safety and working together. And I will see you next time. Aloha.